I used to be the type of person who would do something for a couple of days when I felt motivated, but once that motivation ran out, I would just completely stop doing it. Till the age of 23, I had not read a single book cover to cover. There were like at least 20 books that I had read halfway before I got bored and completely stopped reading them. This cycle of doing something for a couple of days and then stopping, it went on for years. And because of this, I never made any real progress towards things. This was quite frustrating, and I remember feeling guilty all the time because I knew I had been breaking promises to myself. But that is not who I am anymore. I went from this person who could barely stay consistent for 3 days in a row to someone who was now reading multiple books a month, studying 4 hours a day, working on my side hustle, lifting weights and training martial arts consistently for years. Thanks to my newfound consistency, I was able to work as a software engineer at Fortune 500 companies like Dell Technologies, AMD, Synopsys. Additionally, I became one of the top performing students in both my bachelor's and my master's program. In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 cheat codes for consistency that led to this transformation, and I wish I knew them earlier. Now remember that these protocols are not quick 5-minute hacks, but these protocols are real strategies that are going to require you to make some lifestyle changes. So let's get right into it. A couple of years ago, when I started my self-improvement journey and I really decided to fix my life, I started reading this book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and in this book I came across this one concept called activation energy, and this concept completely changed my life. You see that every single activity that we perform, it has an activation energy associated with it. Now this activation energy is just the amount of energy you require to just begin that activity. And if the activation energy required for a particular activity is quite high, that means you are going to have to put a lot of effort to begin that activity. That also means that you are less likely to do that activity, because who on earth wants to put all that effort into something? And similarly, if the activation energy for an activity is quite low, meaning it's much easier to start, that means you're much more likely to do that activity, because human beings take the path of least resistance. I think the best way to think of activation energy is as a barrier between you and the activity. Now this activity could be anything. It could be something cognitively challenging, it could be something physically challenging, whatever it may be. You have to jump across its activation energy barrier to just start doing that activity. So in the past, one way that I would jump over this barrier is by using raw motivation. And this worked. The days where I felt really motivated, I was just able to jump over this barrier quite easily using my raw motivation. But the thing is, motivation is a limited resource. Making all these jumps depletes you of motivation, and one day you wake up without absolutely any motivation, and those are the days where you fail to do this activity because you cannot jump over the activation energy barrier anymore. And this is when it hit me. The way to consistently do an activity is not to rely on raw motivation. It's rather to lower the activation energy barrier for that activity. For example, think about the fact that you have been brushing your teeth for decades. You don't even have to think about it. You just wake up and automatically do it. That's because the activation energy of that task is that low. You don't even have to put in any effort. And this is exactly how consistent people think of the activities that they are doing. To them, that activity has become as easy as brushing their teeth. And I know this sounds kind of absurd, because the image of a disciplined person that we have is someone who's like cold-blooded, emotionless, who just keeps doing hard things, who's always motivated, who just goes against his will all the time. But the truth is that a truly consistent, disciplined person does not use an ounce of motivation. So now the mission of my life changed from increasing motivation to lowering the activation energy barrier of these activities. I found that one of the most powerful ways to reduce that activation energy barrier is to start living your life by a routine. Back then, I used to live my life very impulsively. I used to wake up when I wanted to, go to bed when I wanted to. Some days I would be very motivated and I would read 40 pages of a book. Some days I would feel lazy. I would just lie down on the couch and start scrolling. What I realized when I was living my life out of pure emotion and impulse was that the activation energy for every single activity, every single productive activity, seemed a lot more. But ever since I started scheduling things and living my life by a routine, like I knew what time I had to do what activity, it felt that it was a lot easier to do those activities once you have the time of that activity noted down. Because when you have nothing planned for the moment, you are actually debating yourself and contemplating 1,000 other things that you could be doing. Hey, could I be going to the gym right now? Should I be resting right now? Should I be doing my homework right now? And all this decision making on the go, it actually costs you psychological energy. And this psychological energy could have instead been used to climb over the activation energy barrier. But when you have these tasks noted down on a piece of paper with the time next to it, then at that given time, you do not have to debate yourself. You do not have to make all these decisions. You simply have to blindly follow a piece of paper that shows you what exactly you should be doing. And this way you save all that psychological energy and find it much easier to climb over the activation energy barrier. So here's a pro tip. In my routine, I would be required to wake up early morning, like around 5:30 a.m. and perform a study session that is a couple of hours long. What I would do is that the previous night, I would actually make sure that my desk is clean, my laptop is open, I had the study material ready, I had a water bottle ready, and I had a stopwatch ready. Basically, all the things that I would require for this study session were ready before I started the study session. This way, you're actually removing all the micro barriers between you and the activity. And once you remove all these tiny micro barriers, that activity becomes much easier to begin. But imagine had I woken up at 5:30 a.m. I don't know where my laptop is. I don't know where my notes are. I have to go and fetch water. I have to go and find my stopwatch. All these things add on to the activation energy barrier, and therefore you're much less likely to do them. Also, make sure that initially when you start living your life by routine, make the routine something simple and easy to follow. If you make the routine too complicated or list like 32 activities in it, then ironically even a routine begins to act like a big barrier. And you would end up just skipping the routine entirely, because who the hell wants to deal with all this stuff? And this is me speaking from experience. I designed a routine where I would be required to wake up at 4 a.m., study for 3 hours, read books, then go for a run. What ended up happening is that I played video games all along because the routine seemed like such a barrier to me. So initially when you start living by routine, prioritize consistency over intensity. As you get consistent with that given routine, then would be the time to increase the intensity of the activities on that list. The next protocol made it possible for me to be consistent for years. Without this, you're actually going to feel bored, tired, unmotivated, and eventually going to quit. So previously, I only used to feel positive emotions when I would have accomplished something. But the truth is that anything that is worth accomplishing, it usually takes months, if not years. So basically my sense of happiness, the sense of pleasure, fulfillment came after months and years, only after the accomplishment was made. And that too was very short-living, because as soon as I would set my next goal, I would now begin chasing that goal and wait for me to accomplish that goal before I could feel happy. This meant that I was actually starving for positive emotion for most of my life. And when you are starving for positive emotions, it's very hard to remain consistent because it becomes very hard to jump over the activation energy barriers. And this is when I switched my mindset to being action oriented. Now my source of happiness was my day-to-day journey, the day-to-day tasks, the day-to-day things that I was ticking off my routine. Every single time I followed my routine or ticked something off my routine, I would feel a sense of pleasure, and I would know that, whoa, I'm a step closer to my goal. I'm a better person than I was yesterday. So this meant that I was receiving positive emotions multiple times in a day. And when you're like so full of positive emotions, so rejuvenated by the things that you're doing, then you have a much easier time jumping over the activation energy barrier and doing things consistently. I no longer had to wait for some far off event that may or may not happen. Every single day was a win for me. And that is the secret to consistency, to be honest. You need to feel like you are a winner every single day. Like, think about this analogy, for example. Like, there are two people who are required to climb Mount Everest. And Mount Everest is like a grueling climb. It takes like on average 60 days to climb this thing. So you tell person one that, hey man, if and only if you reach the peak of Mount Everest, you're going to get like $1 million. Whereas to person two, you say that, you know what? You are going to get that 1 million as you hit the peak, but for every step that you take, you're also going to get $100. Which of them do you think is going to have a more enjoyable time making that climb, making that long, grueling climb? Which of them is even going to be able to sustain that climb? The one whose reward is uncertain, or the one who's constantly being rewarded for every single step that he takes? The next protocol is something that is crucial for consistency, but it is something that 90% of the people are not doing. Like, this protocol alone could literally save you from years of struggle. I realized that in the past, I did not have any meaningful goals in my life. Sure, there were things that I kind of wanted, like I kind of wanted good grades, I kind of wanted a good physique, I kind of wanted a good career, but these were not things that I really wanted or I was dedicated to. If I achieved them, sure, it was great, but if I did not get get them, no harm, no foul. And it is now that I realize that without a meaningful goal in your life, you are like a leaf floating through the wind. Like, why bother being consistent? Why bother working hard when your hard work, your consistency, your discipline lead to nothing? They mean nothing. Because you don't have a goal, there is nothing to achieve. So why bother putting in all this extra work? This is when I realized that you need a meaningful goal at all times in your life. And this doesn't mean that the goal has to remain the same. You could have different goals for different phases of your life. But the thing is, there has to be a North Star. There has to be something guiding you. So don't stress too much about finding the perfect goal, but think about finding one meaningful goal for the current phase of your life. And I noticed that as soon as I wrote down a meaningful goal, all the other activities that were associated with that goal, they seem to be much more easy to perform. It's like the activation energy of all these activities just came down, because now I knew that I was now working towards a far greater picture, and all these tiny activities were step towards that far bigger picture. For example, there was a phase in my life a couple of years ago where I really wanted to be the best version of myself as a martial artist. Now, I didn't want to turn pro or something, but I had always imagined that someday I'm going to have a family and I'm going to be required to protect them. So I always wanted to be physically competent and be able to defend them. And this was like my big, grand, meaningful goal. All the activities such as running, the sparring that I was doing, the bag work, like all these things seemed a lot easier to do, and I was a lot more consistent at them when I had this grand goal. And I still remember this, like one Friday night, I was riding my electric scooter and it was the coldest day that I remember. It was minus 30 degrees back in Canada, and a cold wind was hitting my face. There was fog all around, poor visibility, and I was just riding my way to this martial arts gym where we were supposed to spar, and I knew that I am going to be punched and kicked in the head. That is how I decided to spend my Friday night. And I think to myself that I was able to jump across all these barriers, these unfavorable conditions, only and only because I had a meaningful goal in my life. Like, this quote is so true. He who has a why can overcome any how.